Tonight's topic is Darwinism and evolution. I might get onto the controversy of evolution in the Bible, but in a later talk. But tonight, I think we only have time to discuss Darwinism. Darwinism as a not as a sociological, not as a scientific theory, but as a philosophy. Let's call it a philosophy. I have been known to say before to other folks I've had occasion to talk to you about the subject, is that I'm the only guy in the world I've ever met who's read, actually read The Origin of Species, but which is still, I think, important because it brings up some interesting anomalies that that arise from this observation. Now, think about in Darwin's day. Notice if you read The Descent of Man or The Origin of the Species or that sort of thing, you have a look at Darwin's writings. You notice he's always quoting people. He's always quoting people's memoirs, books, pamphlets, because Darwin seems to have been into travel writing, and a lot of his scientific ideas, he tries to gain support from anecdotes from travellers, because a lot of travellers in his day would actually go on jaunts in Africa and South America and Asia, and they would come back and they would publish memoirs. They'd try to raise some cash by giving public lectures and publishing their memoirs, which Darwin certainly seems to have been an avid reader. But I mean, at least since the invention of printing, this was going on quite a bit. And a lot of these writers, you could characterize them as being simply uneven quality. I mean, there was all kinds of famous, careful scientists, and there was many adventurers, profiteers, slave traders, people who were trying to plunder the world and its uneducated natives for gold and silver and artifacts and lumber, and so back then there was this uneven quality of, well, I mean, you couldn't really call, a modern scientist is trained to, even in social sciences or in the arts, you train people, writers are trained to source, they support their claims with sources and other papers, other authors who've researched certain areas. Now, if you get through some of Darwin's writings, you will discover he has a beef with slavery. Now, Darwin and his familial predecessors have the reputation of being abolitionists, anti-slavery abolitionists of some sort. And Charles Darwin seems to have grown up in an environment of people who are philosophically abolitionist, but in the sense that Darwin knows how to talk the talk, but there are some real schisms in his writings. Darwin speaks out against, slavery, but at the same time he has this breathtaking arrogance. I mean, the way he talks about native tribes is can be astonishing. Like he will casually say the Eskimos are animals, and he has no problem with equating South American Indians or Australian Aboriginals with animals in terms of their state, and this is an insouciance that just seems to be born of a feeling of, I wouldn't call him a racist in the sense that he has some kind of antipathy or hatred towards other races. He just seems to have this breathtakingly careless arrogance towards them that seems born of this vast feeling of superiority. Now, if you read, by the way, if you read Frederick Douglass, the famous American abolitionist, his famous speech he gave in Rochester before the Civil War, it's quite a polemic speech, but it's interesting to note if you read all of it. One of his motivations in the lecture is to argue vigorously for the idea that the Negro is in fact a human. And one thing he bitterly complains of in his famous speech in Rochester is having to combat this crazy idea that was circulating that Negroes are not fully human, justifying their enslavement. So this was actually going on in the 1840s, 1850s, before the Civil War. These meta-scientific ideas swirling about. So I don't think you can really divorce Darwin's writings from his own time. Now, Darwin is talked about in hushed, hallowed, in hushed tones and in hallowed terms because he's a great scientist. But one thing I've noticed, which is anomalous in my comparing my education to actually reading Darwin's writings, was that what I learned was Darwinism at school, survival of the fittest. But that's what I learned. So, but if you read, it's very strange if you read Darwin's actual writings, the scientific ideas, that is to say, the ideas he proposes, which he tries to shore up with anecdotes from travellers and his own wanderings with a scientific expedition. The thing about the scientific ideas that that Darwin advances are in fact known to be these days to be completely wrong. Now I don't remember this anomaly being ever discussed when I was at school, but Darwin had this very strange idea that, for example, a tribe in, I think it was the Congo, didn't have any hair on their legs because the hair was being rubbed off while they were using their legs to hang on to the walls of their canoes while they were paddling. And one thing in Darwin's writing, this theory, this metathesis that he advances quite a lot, is to say that something that happens to like a body or a person or an animal a lot during your life somehow gets imprinted onto their genes. And it's like saying, if you have a man cut his arm off, he has some children, you take his children, cut their arm off, they have children, you take their children, you cut their arm off. He says, he's trying to suppose that within a few generations children would be born with no arm or a missing arm. Now that is scientifically an absurdity, but I mean the examples that Darwin advances to somehow shore up this theory, the fact that indoor Negroes, black servants in America in the years of slavery, he says that within a few generations indoor Negroes can be found to have a different physique from outdoor Negroes. Now, I mean, he mentions research done by just travelers, which just sound like nothing but as anecdotes and wild, just. I mean, you can't. The sort of the methodologies, as they are, that Darwin has to support his theories are nothing like scientific methodologies, and they're just more random anecdotes, hearsay, and this is the difficulty, because what everyone thinks of as Darwinism these days is something to do with selective breeding. That is to say, you're noting that selective breeding can give rise to quite distinct appearing breeds of animals, like dogs, Dalmatians versus German Shepherds, Chihuahuas, Labradors, Irish Wolfhounds. There's these breeds of dogs that you can breed by selective breeding. Now, the Darwinism that is passed off at schools is that somehow the universe or the planet or fate or the vicissitudes of life function as a hidden hand, a lot like Adam Smith's hidden hand in economics. That this selective breeding is done by this mystical hidden hand of fate, and that's the idea that breeds. Now, Darwin didn't seem to have a strong distinction between a breed and a species, which is one of them. Just immense flaws in his work, because we know that the breed species distinction is dictated by the number of chromosomes. And even animals that have the same number of chromosomes, like horses and donkeys, and camels and llamas and lions and tigers, they can breed, but they have offspring, like mules, that are incapable of sexual reproduction. So the species barrier, we know, is practically impossible to cross for a lot of reasons, but Darwin seems to have crossed the barrier by magic, just ignoring the distinction. Now I don't. This is such a difficulty with Darwinism that is, which is never mentioned, because the thesis, meta-Darwinism, of selective breeding by the survival of the fittest, or some selective breeding by the hand of fate, that theory is not Darwin's central thesis. Darwin's central thesis is some kind of theory that something that a phenotype, say, like an animal, if an animal has something, experiences something in a repetitive way, it's somehow imprinted in their genes. This vague hypothesis is in fact Darwinism. This is the hypothesis that he repeats constantly, and the anecdotes, the traveller's anecdotes that he advances to prove this theory are all about proving this proto-Darwinism, the Darwinism you see in Darwin, and not the meta-Darwinism of later thinkers. But it remains merely to be said that that theory is known to be manifestly non-scientific. It is known to be incorrect. So the central thesis of Darwin's works is in fact known to be laughably wrong, absurdly wrong. I mean, do not even bother talking about a reproducible experiment, because he was saying things that are just known to be just risible.